A few years ago, I led a flight of airmen through pre-deployment training. We were preparing to conduct security for a detainee internment facility in Iraq. After 50 days of training, the final validation exercise was all that remained. The exercise integrated all pre-deployment training into a 72-hour capstone event. The first 60 hours validated standard procedures, and we met every mission essential task. But things changed when an emergency scenario required 2 young airmen to process, decide, and respond to a threat using our rules of engagement. These airmen, aged 19 and 20, stood in a guard tower and proceeded to watch as a detainee scaled a fence in an apparent escape attempt. The situation called for escalation to use deadly force. Yet there they stood, weapons at port arms, eyes fixated on the detainee, standing as still as statues without a single utterance. As I saw the detainee carry out his plan, my flight sergeant and I ran towards the tower screaming to our airmen, "Shoot! Shoot him!" But they didn't respond. The detainee escaped, and concern that that error would cause us to fail our training validation began to swell. After emotions cooled, I sat them down and asked what happened. They truly did not know. They had received standardized training. They could recall the proper procedures, yet they failed to react. Why? This single event stuck with me. If it wasn't a lack of training or procedural understanding, maybe it was something we were not addressing. Maybe the problem was my lack of understanding of the cognitive differences between my young adult airmen and mature adults. Maybe the problem was how we trained. Over the past 6 years, I sought to understand if, in fact, there are differences between young adults ages 17 to 25 and mature adults. It turns out there are significant differences that are relevant to the military leader. The differences between the brain of a young adult and the brain of a fully mature adult are not immediately obvious. Although primary brain structures are physically present in both groups, the primary areas of activation and signal speeds within those areas are quite different. Current neuroscience research indicates human brain maturation requires at least 26 years. Even more surprising, emerging neuroscience research suggests brain integration could continue beyond age 30. Over the last decade, the National Institute of Mental Health conducted a major study to examine how brain regions activate one another over the first 21 years of life. The study found that the brain's connectivity and input patterns, or what we call neural flow, move from the bottom of the brain to the top and from the back of the brain to the front. The brain's bottom to top and back to front neural flow is significant to understanding how brain integration occurs and how sensory information is processed. As the young adult matures, brain systems increasingly integrate from evolutionary primitive autonomic brain systems to high-functioning cognitive systems. In general, young adult brains are only about 80% mature, with the strongest connections rising from the lower back where the brainstem lives. The remaining 20% gap, located in the upper front where the neural integration is weakest, the frontal lobes, is crucial to controlling self-behavior. Indeed, the very last places to link in the areas of weakest integration until age 26 or beyond are the frontal lobes. Weak frontal lobe integration helps explain why young adults sometimes behave in risky or irrational ways. The frontal lobes regulate executive functioning. As the brain's highest processing system, the frontal lobes act together to generate characteristic human behaviors and decision making. The frontal lobes coordinate or inhibit other parts of the brain help the mind focus on the main point of a situation, set goals, and enable critical and creative thinking. Under threat, a well-integrated brain unlocks frontal lobe resources to filter perceived threats from a rational perspective. Weak front brain integration, such as that commonly found in young adults, presents frontal lobes that are functionally less capable of rational evaluation of threats as quickly as or to the level capable of their mature counterparts. The result is a brain that may be structurally powerless to anticipate potential consequences of actions. It also impacts production of critically thoughtful and agile decisions under tight time constraints characteristic of military operations. There is a direct correlation between frontal lobe integration and behavior self-regulation. When young adults encounter particularly threatening situations, they react based on the mental processing means available. Unfortunately, these early hardwired components, collectively known as the limbic system, are predisposed to operate from survival rather than performance aspects of decision making. Often, survival manifests in the form of fight, flight, or freeze. The brain's survival over performance paradigm should be of particular interest to leaders and young adults alike. The intrinsic requirement to operate in high stress and quick decision environments is a risk for young adults who lack full neuroanatomical capacities. Understanding the intricacies of how brain function differs and develops between mature and young adults presents significant challenges and implications for commanders and supervisors. While leaders can't force biological development to occur, they can set conditions to enable change. Leaders have wide latitude in integrating neuroscience into performance training. And there are many roads to achieve positive results. To jumpstart their efforts, I offer leaders two baseline starting points to address the inherent gap between young and mature adults. One, providing basic neuroscience education, and two, fostering a deliberate practice culture. First, leaders should develop and deliver a targeted Neuro 101 course to inform young adults on their brain structure and how its design affects judgment and decision-making in their particular field. A Neuro 101 course would move leaders and young adults from what we call the precognitive stage of change, where they're not even aware that a problem exists, to the awareness stage of change, where they can decide if they now want to act on that now known information. Neuroscience evidence should inform the why behind the what of decision-making processes. Simply creating awareness that a cognitive gap exists will elicit behavior change. Additional research indicates that creating awareness of brain function and limitations creates a natural motivation to want to reduce those gaps. A recent study informed teenagers on their brain structure, physiological responses, brain wiring and rewiring, and a clear message that they had control over their own brain development. The results were significant. Providing teenagers with neuroscience education created awareness and initiated changes from fixed mindsets to malleable growth mindsets. Once the subjects understood that they were the responsible agents for their thoughts and their brain growth, learning pathways changed as well. The differences between the experimental and control groups were substantial. Over a 2-year period, the experimental group who received neuroscience education experienced a steady upward trend of scholastic performance. Those who did not receive neuroscience education experienced a commensurate downward trend at the same rate of the experimental group. The resulting disparity in performance between the two groups is significant for military leaders to understand. Simply creating awareness of brain structure and functions will nudge many young adults to take an active role in their professional and intellectual efforts. Even if results are modest, minor improvements applied across a large force are significant to producing both short and long-term benefits. The second baseline strategy, fostering a deliberate practice culture, suggests leaders focus on how available time is used, not how much training time is available. Based on research of world-class performers from every domain, the deliberate practice model follows 3 primary guidelines. First, practice skills with an explicit goal of getting much better. Trainers must spend an inordinate amount of time teaching in the cognitive and associative stages of learning, or what we call crawl and walk phases, as compared to the autonomous stage, or what we like to call the run stage. Trainers who are limited on time must focus on the crawl and walk phases and fight the urge to rush into the run phase. Many trainers mistakenly believe that all good training comes from the run phase when trying to master a skill. In reality, greatest gains in skill development, especially when trying to learn a new skill, occurs in the crawl phase. Second, trainers and trainees must stay in the moment and be present. Leaders should think about how training evolutions are designed to maximize mental repetitions. Since it is rare for all trainees to participate in the same time, leaders should assess if their training culture encourages learning by active viewership. Is the training area viewable by inactive trainees? Are cell phones allowed in the training area? Most importantly, are NCOs talking through another team's performance with his or her team? Likewise, trainers involved must remain present for signs of threat responses or startle reflex at the individual level and be ready to provide immediate feedback. Third, trainers and trainees should seek as much feedback as possible. Immediate feedback is essential, especially in the crawl phase. Trainers should identify and address performance errors the moment they occur to avoid encoding poor habits, decision-making, and movements. It is much more difficult to change a motor output than create a correct one. A properly trained movement will retain its quality even as speed increases. Trainers must remain aware of how trainees operate in the walk and run phases. When motor outputs or movements are no longer quality, we must stop training. The ultimate goal of training is to develop proper neurosignatures, or what we refer to as muscle memory, to create skilled pathways for real-world application. Quantity over quality compromises neurosignature development. The deliberate practice model offers leaders an adaptive training framework. A serious focus on the quality of movement and response is preferred over the quantity of training. Quality-focused training creates reaction fluency by building and reinforcing brain myelination. High-quality training expedites brain myelination and is correlated to the quality of real-world decision-making. Myelin, or white matter, increases integration between rear sensory and front motor cortices. Increased myelin, along with other cellular processes, increases the front brain's synaptic speed, precision, and efficiency. The results are not subtle. Myelinated brain cells deliver signals up to 100 times faster than non-myelinated cells. These increased speeds help level the response time deviations commonly found between mature and young adults. Where neuroscience education creates an awareness, the deliberate training model actively helps to close those gaps between young and mature adults. Looking back at that pre-deployment scenario where my airmen failed to fire, I wonder if things could be different. Maybe if I would have known my airmen better, I could have given them more specific training that accounted for their individual needs. Maybe if I had known the information I just discussed, I could have designed my training to be more effective. I can't change the past, but I can learn from it and apply what I learned to lead in the future. As leaders, we have a choice. We can continue to follow traditional methods because that's the way we've always done it and produce a standard result. That idea is comforting, and that belief is woven into many of our cultures. But our current state is changing. The future presents unprecedented challenges. We must take an introspective look at our organization and ask ourselves if what got us here is good enough for predicted war. In looking, we must not be afraid to admit those areas in which we are weak. I'll admit, neuroscience is not a panacea, but it is a start. Actually, it's a challenge. Are the leaders responsible for change, that is, the people who are watching this video, willing to embrace the discomfort of searching for better ways? How our military performs in the future falls on the shoulders of mid-level NCOs and officers to implement and embrace change today. We need leaders of character and innovation. We need you. Thank you.